This M3 MacBook Air may well be my favourite product from Apple at the moment. The power and performance you get and the package that it's all wrapped up in is absolutely stunning. I said a while ago if I wasn't doing this YouTube channel and I just wanted a laptop that would keep up with my interest in filmmaking and photography while still being a good laptop, then the MacBook Air is where I would put my money. And I've been using this for 3 months now and I can pretty much confirm that's true. This has been so good that I pretty much stopped using my MacBook Pro altogether because this little thing, well, it does it all. Seriously, if you're still on one of the Intel MacBooks, you need to make the jump immediately because the difference is just insane. This is the 13-inch model with 512 gig of storage and 16 gig of RAM, and in this video I'm going to tell you how it's been holding up for me over the last 3 months, so let's get into it. I want to start by explaining what my workflows are and what my kind of potential creator bias might be, because I know it won't line up with everyone that's looking at buying this laptop. And for reference, my baseline Macs are an M1 Max Mac Studio and an M1 Pro MacBook Pro. So I'm already using relatively high levels of Mac, and I'm a creative for a job, so making things like these YouTube videos. So my main deal is photo editing and video editing and editing short form for loads of different platforms, and also doing a little bit of design work. And I do the more standard stuff too, so emailing, calendar, calls, watching stuff, browsing the web and all that sort of thing. But my main deal very much is focused towards those kind of creative outlets, not so much on the normal stuff. So for my creator and general overall usage, this thing has held up incredibly well. It's quick, snappy, and performs really nicely. And surprisingly so to me, it's actually quicker than my M1 Max Mac Studio and my M1 Pro MacBook Pro at the simple stuff. So opening up kind of easy applications and browsing the web and things like that. And it has that real snappy kind of new iPhone, new iPad feeling where things just open up really quickly. And I'm even a Google Chrome user, which I know is sacrilege to use on a Mac, and it holds up fine there too. For my creative workflows as well, it's actually been surprisingly good. You know, Final Cut, InDesign, Photoshop, these are kind of the main things that I open on a pretty much daily basis, and this Mac has handled it with no issues at all. The only time I can really tell a difference between this and my kind of higher power computers is when I come to export something, where the Mac Studio will absolutely flat out beat it and the M1 Pro MacBook Pro is just a tiny bit better. But otherwise, it handles those apps really nicely. And for some reference, I took this to the last Apple event in London and it was absolutely fine. It handled editing that video where I had to be really quick and upload it really fast, really easily, no problems at all. I even managed to hit export and then jump into Photoshop and design the thumbnail while it was doing that, which is always something which blows me away. And that's pretty much as hard as I'll ever push a Mac, and the fact that it can do it with no fans and no kind of issues with thermal throttling or anything like that was awesome. Really good. I did want to keep an eye on thermals though, because I know that's a big thing which people think about when they're looking at buying a MacBook Air, because there's no fan in here, so it can only get so hot, and when it does start getting hot, it's going to thermally throttle itself so it doesn't overheat. And look, I want to be completely honest, I use very optimized apps on my Mac, maybe apart from Chrome, and for me, I've experienced nothing like that. I actually installed an app called Heat, which lets me kind of monitor all of the thermals in the Mac, and yet, of course, this thing does heat up. The normal running temperature for me, I found, is between 40 and 50 kind of degrees, that sort of area. But then when you start using the kind of bigger apps and things like that, it kind of jumps up to 60, 70, 80, and even 90 sometimes. But that seems to not affect performance at all, especially not in what I'm doing. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm sure it will for some people, but for my creative workflows and how I'm using that laptop, I've had no slowdown there at all. And I've also not had any issues with things like hot legs or the laptop being uncomfortable to hold or anything like that. As I mentioned earlier, the hardest I push my Mac is when I'm exporting a video and I go off to do something else, like work on a thumbnail or just browse the internet or watch a video somewhere else. And even while doing that on this M3 MacBook Air, I haven't run into any thermal or weird issues at all. So for me, firmly, this thing seems absolutely fine. I think it's only fair to talk about this while it's docked as well, so welcome back to my home office. I know it's been a while, but when I bring my MacBook home, I always dock it in like a little MacBook holder and then connect it to my screen. And for me, performance here at home is pretty much exactly the same. I did think the thermals would get worse. I thought it would get quite a lot hotter, especially now that it's in clamshell mode and being held, but it's basically the same as it was, which is kind of a relief to know. I did worry it might be a little bit worse here. There is this small inkling of slow up occasionally. When I'm using Final Cut and other creative apps, Final Cut can feel a little bit sticky when I'm kind of scrubbing through stuff really quickly, but switching it to performance mode definitely helps. Now, whether that's a thermal thing or the chip meeting its maximum output, I'm not overly sure, but switching it back to performance mode on Final Cut solves it pretty much immediately. The other thing I've really enjoyed about the MacBook Air is obviously the portability. This thing is so slim and so light that taking it around anywhere with you is just a no-brainer. You might as well. It's no different from having like a notebook in your bag or something like that, and it doesn't weigh down your bag like a kind of regular laptop or MacBook Pro does. This thing really is small, and it's actually still smaller than the brand new M4 iPad Pro with the keyboard attached, and lighter as well, which is just mad when you think about it. And I've also got to say the battery life on this has been awesome too. And battery life on the M series MacBooks is already great, but on here it's also fantastic. You're going to get through a day no problem at all, and even with my kind of more intense creative workflows, I get through a day of this no problem at all. The only time where I've seen the power go down kind of relatively fast is if I was editing in Final Cut Pro off the power, but even then it's still a lot. You're probably going to get about 5 or 6 hours. So yeah, battery life also really good. Also, while we're here, can I just point out how nice this wallpaper suits this MacBook? This is part of the Bound 2 series. I'll link it below if you want to check it out, but yeah, that just looks perfect. So far everything's been pretty good, but obviously nothing's perfect, and there's still some things I really don't like about this laptop. And straight up for me, one of them is ports. I'm used to the MacBook Pro having an SD card slot and an HDMI and all those sorts of things, and the MacBook Air just has less. I can get past some of it. You know, this is a tiny computer, it's not going to have space for an HDMI or something like that. But the only thing I really wish it had was a USB-C port on the right hand side as well as the left. These are all on the left, which is fine, but when you're at a desk setup and you need to plug in a monitor that goes to the right or something like that, it just makes everything a little bit more awkward and hard. So sometimes you have to wrench around a cable to get it into the left side, when it would have just been so much easier if there's one on the right. I really wish that was here. And the other thing I will say as well is, if there's an SD card slot on here on the right too, I would love that. And because of that lack of ports, you are of course going back to using a dongle. Now, I was pretty happy to go dongle free as of late because I've got the MacBook Pro, which got the SD card slot in it. But if you've got a MacBook Air, you're basically going to have to get one. I managed to pick up this midnight colored one from Satechi, which plugs into the side and gives you kind of all the ports you need back. But it's kind of a shame to have to think about taking a dongle everywhere you go with you just to get the right ports. I was happy to be over that, but now I'm back in it. Alright, I wanted to do a fingerprint update for you. So this is my MacBook Pro in silver, and I honestly can't remember the last time that I wiped it down. And yeah, it's a bit dirty, there's a few fingerprints here and there. But for comparison, this is the M3 MacBook Air in midnight, and I wiped it off this morning to film, and it's already kind of a lot worse. So fingerprints are still an issue. If it's important to you, get a silver one or a space grey or a starlight and not the midnight. I still really like this colour, but yeah, fingerprints are very much still here. Alright, let's talk about one of the huge questions of this MacBook, and that is the base model enough? And the answer to that is kind of tricky, but let me try and lay it out for you. Basically, yes, the base model with 256 gigabytes of storage and 8 gigabytes of RAM, it feels painfully low, and it is. I don't like it, no one likes it. It's a crazy place for a laptop to start that costs over £1,000. However, if you are doing that general computing stuff, if you're browsing the web, taking calls, writing things up, emailing, spreadsheets, kind of anything like that, which is kind of falls under this umbrella of general stuff, then yeah, honestly, that base model will be absolutely fine for you. 256 gigabytes of storage doesn't sound like a lot, but so many people work in the cloud now that you might not find it affects you too much at all. And it's going to be able to handle some creative work as well, even though it's not specifically made for it. However, if you're planning on using this for, a little bit more creative work with all of that general computing stuff as well, I would really suggest you bump up the RAM to 16 gigabytes at least. That will just help the whole computer last a bit longer. And if you're jumping into Photoshop and you're jumping into kind of Final Cut or InDesign or Premiere Pro or anything like that on and off, then you're going to appreciate the little bit of headroom that gives you. Now, to lay out my creator bias, for me, I absolutely need the 16 gigabytes of RAM and a bit more storage. 256 gigabytes of storage isn't enough for me sometimes to hold a single video project, so I need that more storage. And when I'm running Final Cut and a little bit of Photoshop as well and Google Chrome and all that, my RAM usage jumps up to like 12, 13, 14 gigabytes of use. So for someone like me, I need something with a little bit more beef to it. And look, if you are wondering about how much RAM you need and you're not sure at all and you have a Mac right now, if you open up an app called Activity Monitor, which is built into your Mac, and click on memory, it will actually show you how much RAM you're using. What you want to do is just check this little bit at the bottom called memory pressure and just check on that throughout the day while you're working. If it stays in the green, then you're fine with the amount of RAM that you have. But if it's constantly going into the yellow and then sometimes into the red, then yeah, you might need more RAM. So that's a really decent way of kind of showing how much you need. Oh, and this comes in a 13-inch size and a 15-inch size as well. And a lot of people on Instagram ask me which size you should get. Honestly, it's up to you. If you want one with a bigger screen, get the one with the bigger screen. And if you want the one that's smaller, then get the smaller one. For me personally, a MacBook Air is supposed to be small and tiny and portable. So for me, that screams 13-inch. That's the one I pretty much always go for. But I have had the 15-inch M2 version, and it wasn't that much heavier and it wasn't that much bigger despite getting a much larger screen. So that's a perfectly good way to go too. The only real upgrade on the kind of 15-inch is you get a bigger speaker. So the speakers sound better than they do on the 13-inch. But otherwise, it's basically the same laptop. It's even got the same battery life too. Also, if you want to save some money, pretty much everything I've said goes for the M2 version of this as well, and that starts like at £100 cheaper. And if you look at education pricing, you can get it at a better deal as well. And sometimes, especially around now, kind of before all the schools go back, Apple often do things like gift cards and stuff like that. And of course, it's worth checking out the Apple Refurbished site, or just checking for pre-owned M2s and M3s in general if you're looking to save a bit as well. The other thing you might be thinking as well is, as soon as I start speccing up this laptop with a bit more RAM and a bit more storage and things like that, I'm getting into MacBook Pro territory. So should I just buy one of those instead? And the honest answer to that is probably not. And let me kind of explain this to you in a kind of more simple way. If you're doing general computer stuff and maybe some creative stuff here and there, then a MacBook Air will be absolutely fine for you. You don't need to jump up to the Pro. But if the first thing you do when you open your laptop is you dive into video editing or photo editing or anything creative or anything where you know you might be pushing it a little bit harder, then yeah, you should absolutely jump up to a Pro. The problem is, if you're kind of one of those people that just do general stuff and you pick up the Pro, it's almost like buying a Ferrari just to go around town in. Sure, it can do it, but you're never going to push it to the absolute limit of performance. And isn't that kind of the point of having one? Anyway, that's how I like to think about it. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I wanted to wrap up this video by saying, look, this laptop is clearly not made specifically for someone like me. I'm jumping into creative stuff all the time, so for me, a MacBook Pro just makes so much more sense, or a Mac Studio or something like that. But the fact that it's kept up with everything I've asked for it has made me really, really appreciate it. This is a really, really great little MacBook. So if you do anything on the same level or less than what I do, this MacBook is going to serve you incredibly well, and it will last for years and years and years. And what I will say is the same goes for the M2 model of this as well, which you can pick up a little bit cheaper. That M2 chip is just as capable pretty much as this M3. And look, if you're on an Intel MacBook, then you absolutely need to make the jump to any of the M series. And if you're already on the M series, I don't think there's probably anything here to make you want to jump up. Maybe if you're on the M1 Air and you fancy the new design, then it might be worth it. But otherwise, just stick with what you got. So there you have it. I really, really love this product, and I'm actually going away on holiday for 3 weeks relatively soon, and I wasn't going to take anything with me. I was debating taking my iPad, but because this is so tiny, I'm actually going to take it with me to enjoy having a laptop while I'm away. Anyway, that wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, pop a like, hit the subscribe button, that'd be awesome, and I will see you all in the next one.